Coming up on our newscast tonight, the nation's daily COVID-19 tally inches closer to 7,000. The government is updating and expanding measures, including the use of oral pills. President Moon Jae-in wraps up his three-nation tour to the Middle East and North Africa. During the visits, he bolsters defense and energy cooperation. The top diplomats of Washington and Moscow meet in Geneva. It's the latest round of talks aimed at de-escalating tensions on the Ukrainian border. Hello, hope you're wrapping up the week well. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let us begin with the top story at this hour. South Korea reported more than 6,700 new COVID-19 cases. With Omicron likely to become dominant soon, authorities devised a new virus response plan. Kim Hyun-sung starts us off.
With an Omicron surge coming up, South Korea is getting prepared. Omicron now makes up close to half of the domestic caseload.
The Omicron made up 47.1% of cases this week. We expect it to become the dominant strain next week.
To ramp up testing, the government will make rapid antigen self-test kits available free of charge at COVID-19 screening centers.
PCR tests will be for high-risk groups only, so that'll speed up the process. Standing in long lines in this cold weather to get tested will become less frequent.
Isolation for confirmed patients will be shortened from 10 days to just a week. The government is also mobilizing local clinics for testing and treatment. All these changes will first be applied on a trial basis in regions that are witnessing an alarming spread of Omicron.
We're going to reform the systems in Gwangju Jeollanam-do Province, Pyeongtaek, and Ansong first. It'll start next Wednesday, January 26th, for these four regions.
Meanwhile, as of Thursday, only 109 people had received Pfizer's oral treatment Paxlovid since rollouts began last week. This is far short of the government's initial goal of prescribing the pill to 1,000 people a day. So authorities are ramping up Paxlovid's use nationwide.
We're bringing down the minimum age of drug administration from 65 to 60 and expanding its use in nursing homes, care hospitals, and infectious disease hospitals.
Another change is coming in regards to funerals. Previously, infected patients had to be completely isolated from their loved ones after death and had to be immediately cremated. But as health authorities found no cases of infection from dead bodies, they'll be allowing funerals before the cremation. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
3 South Korean companies will be making COVID-19 pills developed in the U.S. Seoul will then export the drugs to more than 100 low- and middle-income countries. Choi Min-jung has the full story.
Oral COVID-19 treatments will now be manufactured in South Korea as well. The country's health ministry announced Thursday that 3 domestic companies were chosen to produce low-cost versions of MSD's COVID-19 pill, Molnupiravir. These companies are Celltrion, Hanmi Pharmaceutical, and Dongbang FTL. The medication is set to be distributed to 105 low- and middle-income countries. Celltrion will manufacture the finished product. Dongbang FTL will produce the raw materials, and Hanmi Pharmaceutical will make both the ingredients and the finished drug itself. The health minister has vowed to put full support behind the production and distribution of oral COVID-19 pills. The government also plans on forming and operating a consultative body with related ministries, companies, and associations to ramp up the overall process. Including the 3 South Korean companies, a total of 27 drug makers from 11 countries were chosen to manufacture the drug by a UN-backed public health organization, the Medicines Patent Pool. Other countries include India, China, Bangladesh, and South Africa. The agency signed a licensing agreement with MSD and Pfizer in 2021 and received applications from companies willing to produce the oral treatment. The review for selecting generic drug manufacturers for Pfizer's Paxlovid treatment is still ongoing. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The government finalized its proposal for an extra budget to provide greater assistance to small businesses hit by the pandemic, worth almost $12 billion. Some of it will also be spent on fighting COVID-19. Here's Kim Sung-min with a breakdown of the digits.
South Korea's cabinet on Friday has agreed on the extra budget proposal for 2022 worth almost $12 billion. This time, it's solely for pandemic-hit businesses and fighting the virus.
What is most important now is to quickly stabilize the virus situation and minimize damage to the livelihoods of small business owners due to antivirus measures. Furthermore, we need to ensure that the recovery trend of the overall economy is maintained as much as possible and find a wise solution to this complex situation.
The latest supplementary budget is worth some $11.7 billion. More than $9 billion will go to small businesses struggling financially due to the pandemic. Some 3.2 million small businesses will get around $2,500 each starting as early as mid-February. This time, not only merchants who suffered due to COVID-19 restrictions, but also those who saw a decline in sales, like the accommodation sector, will be eligible. Around $1.2 billion have been set aside for measures to tackle the virus, such as securing more hospital beds and COVID-19 pills. Some $800 million have been reserved to deal with unexpected spending, like the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. To finance the supplementary budget, the government will issue around $9.5 billion of treasury bonds and use some $2.3 billion from public reserves. The proposal will be submitted to the National Assembly on Monday for lawmakers to review and vote on during the upcoming plenary session. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in wraps up a tour of the Middle East and North Africa. He is expected to arrive in Seoul on Saturday. The trip widely focused on bolstering defense and energy cooperation. Kim Min-ji runs us through the highlights of the week-long visit.
President Moon Jae-in returns on Friday after a week-long tour of the Middle East and North Africa, with deals in promising areas like defense and eco-friendly energy under his belt. South Korea will be selling mid-range surface-to-air missiles, also known as the Cheonggung-2, to the United Arab Emirates. The two sides signed an MOU following talks between President Moon and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the UAE's prime minister and the ruler of Dubai. Although the specifics have yet to be disclosed, the deal is expected to be worth around $3.5 billion, the largest in the country's defense history for a single weapons contract. The UAE will become the first importer of the missile.
President Moon said he was happy to ink MOUs on mid to long-term defense cooperation and defense technology cooperation, and the deal for Cheonggung-2 went smoothly. He called for continued efforts so it leads to reciprocal cooperation, like joint research and development, production within the UAE, and joint entry into third markets.
While in Saudi Arabia, President Moon met with de facto ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, agreeing to expand the horizon of their cooperation from traditional areas like construction to promising ones such as the hydrogen economy. The two sides inked 9 related MOUs, including one allowing Seoul to secure supplies of hydrogen and ammonia from Riyadh. South Korea will also help build hydrogen-related infrastructure like fueling stations in Saudi Arabia.
수소는 양국의 협력 가능성이 매우 큰 분야입니다. 사우디의 그린 수소와 블루 수소 생산 능력과 한국의 수소 활용 유통 능력을 결합한다면 양국은 함께 수소 경제를 선도할 수 있을 것입니다.
Over in Egypt, President Moon said Seoul and Cairo are in negotiations for Egypt to buy South Korean-made K9 Thunder self-propelled howitzers. Following a summit with his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Moon said the two sides are working toward a final conclusion. If struck, it would be the first time the K9's been exported to the Arab region.
우리 두 정상은 지금 논의되고 있는 K9 자주포 계약이 양국 간 상호 신뢰에 기반한 방산 협력의 성과로서 K9 자주포가 이집트군 전력 정강에 크게 기여함과 동시에 기술 협력, 현지 생산을 통한 한 이집트 간 상생 협력의 대표적 성공 사례가 될 것이라는 데 의견을 같이 하고.
The top office expects Moon's visit to have served as an opportunity to foster a foundation for cooperation with the Middle East and Africa toward a better, sustainable future and contribute to a further increase of exports and orders for construction, weapons, and future energy. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Cairo.
Moving on to other stories now, following Pyongyang's missile test, Washington proposed 5 North Koreans be subject to UN sanctions, but the proposal was blocked by China and Russia. The two sides argue more time and evidence is needed. Bae Eun-ji has the latest.
China and Russia have placed a hold on the proposal by the U.S. to impose new UN sanctions on the regime. Washington unilaterally imposed sanctions against North Korean individuals and entities in response to the regime's recent missile launches. It then proposed that 5 of those individuals should also be subject to UN travel bans and have their assets frozen. But a proposal of this nature requires approval from all 15 members of the UN Security Council, and China said it needed more time to study it, while Russia said more evidence is needed. This came ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on North Korea held behind closed doors later in the day. But 7 Council members and Japan issued a joint statement at the United Nations urging the Security Council to respond to the North threats by implementing sanctions, calling the regime's moves unlawful.
These facts should not be in dispute. The DPRK's unlawful behavior is a threat to international peace and security. It is extremely important that member states take the necessary steps to implement the sanctions in their jurisdictions or risk providing a blank check for the DPRK regime to advance a weapons program.
North Korea has carried out 4 missile launches this year, all of which were in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The regime has also suggested that it will resume nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile testing. Citing an official from the Office of the White House National Security Council spokesperson, state broadcaster Voice of America reported Thursday that the NSC remains prepared to engage in serious and sustained diplomacy with North Korea, without preconditions to make tangible progress. The official added that while the NSC remains committed to diplomacy, it will continue to work with the international community to halt progress in North Korea's ballistic missile programs. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Washington and Moscow's top diplomats met to find ways to ease tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. and its allies earlier warned an act of invasion would bring heavy consequences. Han Sung-woo sheds light on the fragile situation in Eastern Europe.
United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met in Geneva, Switzerland on Friday for the two countries' latest round of talks aimed at de-escalating tensions on the Ukrainian border. Russia has mobilized some 100,000 troops on the border and is being accused by the U.S. of planning an invasion, something Moscow denies.
We have been very clear throughout. If any Russian military forces move across the Ukrainian border and commit new acts of aggression against Ukraine, that will be met with a swift, severe, united response from the United States and our allies and partners.
The top U.S. diplomat had also warned that an invasion of Ukraine would send a wrong message to the international community, that invading a sovereign nation would be an acceptable thing to do.
It's bigger than a conflict between two countries. It's bigger than Russia and NATO. It's a crisis with global consequences. And it requires global attention and action.
Russia is demanding binding security guarantees, which include permanently prohibiting Ukraine from North Atlantic Treaty Organization membership and the removal of most of the Allied military presence in Eastern Europe led by the U.S. Washington and NATO have rejected these requests, saying that any attack on Ukraine would have costly repercussions, a sentiment shared by the European Commission.
If the situation deteriorates, if there are any further attacks on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, we will respond with massive economic and financial sanctions. The transatlantic community stands firm on this. The European Union is by far Russia's biggest trading partner and by far the largest investor.
The U.S. has already imposed sanctions on current and former Ukrainian officials whom it has accused of working on behalf of Russian intelligence to destabilize their own country. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Less than 50 days until South Koreans elect their next president, but with no candidate showing a clear lead, the race could head in any direction. Yu Young weighs the factors that could alter the outcome.
All indications suggest that young voters aged 18 to 39 will be a deciding factor in the upcoming presidential election. While they account for roughly 1/3 of voters, nearly 30% of them are swing voters who don't support any political party. The number is significantly high compared to seniors, nearly all of whom have a clear political preference. Many of these swing voters haven't made up their minds or could change their minds at any time. Polls show there are more female swing voters than males.
They can't easily decide because they're hesitant to support the Democratic Party due to sexual assault scandals surrounding the party in the past. They can't go for the opposition People Power Party either, as they tend to be oriented toward males.
Rather than making their decisions based on the political party, these young people make their decisions based on policies. And they go for those that reflect their interests the most. Their biggest interest is buying a house, followed by making more money and getting jobs. Environmental protection and unification between the two Koreas were among the least important. In other words, they're looking for a president who makes their lives better. Swing voters in general also seem to care about the personal issues surrounding candidates. Take a look at this graph. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung is stuck in the late 30% range. The People Power Party's Yoon Suk-yeol shows a V-shape, hitting a low point then rebounding. It's a similar pattern in other polls too. For Lee, his scandal surrounding a land development project seems to prevent him from expanding his supporter base. For Yoon, he hit low point at around the time when his wife's allegations and the party's internal troubles broke out. And that time period overlaps with when the minor opposition People Power Party's An Chol-soo's ratings went up significantly.
Those people who don't support either Lee or Yoon could have decided on An, driven by his ethical image and career. Some conservatives could also have moved from Yoon to An due to Yoon's personal issues. But those people are seemingly returning to Yoon now.
All this brings much attention to the debates, where voters can learn about candidates' policies, characters, and competency. More than a majority of voters actually say that debates will affect their decisions. The first televised debate is set for later this month. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Every year, thousands of foreigners travel far looking to achieve the Korean dream. At times, they face harsh reality that crush hopes. With the upcoming presidential election, Korea has a chance to lay out exact plans to protect the rights and livelihood of migrants. Shin Yeon explains further.
This is where migrants to South Korea start a new chapter in their lives. Many of them coming through those gates, aspiring to achieve the Korean dream. That term mirrors the American dream held by migrants to the States, hoping for a better and fuller life.
This man had hoped to achieve the Korean dream by launching his own business. Instead, he has been living as an undocumented immigrant for 22 years after losing his passport.
I went to the embassy to apply for a new one, but the review process has been delayed to this day, mostly because I used to be a democracy activist back home.
He says he could be killed if he returns to Myanmar. So he tried to seek asylum, but was asked to pay a fine of over $25,000.
Of course I'd like to pay, but I can't. I earn a little over $2,000 a month. Half I send back home to Myanmar to my family. I'm asking the Korean government to allow me to pay bit by bit monthly.
There are some 400,000 undocumented migrants living in Korea, making up roughly 20% of the foreign population. All have different reasons for why they remain unregistered. It's not just asylum seekers or undocumented migrants who have problems. Anna, who is married to a Korean and has lived here for more than 20 years, also asked for a more compassionate visa policy. As an only child, she's the only one left in her family who can take care of her mother. To increase the chances of sponsoring her mother with permanent residence, Anna has applied for naturalization. But even if Anna becomes Korean, there's currently no law that would allow her to sponsor her mother's visa.
I just wish there were more systems for migrants to protect their rights.
With the presidential election coming up soon, I went to talk to the camps of all 4 presidential candidates to hear their take on migrant issues.
We will create a multicultural committee within our party and hear what problems international families face, and then create comprehensive policies. From there, we will also try to expand discussions to include immigration policies.
Many E9 workers reach very higher skills, sufficient skills, but nevertheless they have to leave the country. Let such workers stay longer and also facilitate their transition into other types of other statuses, like E7, right, which are given to various kinds of skilled workers.
Korea needs to amend its refugee law. Refugees are basically human rights violation victims. We need to understand that their lives are at risk. We should ease the standards on who is accepted as a refugee and help them during their stay.
We have the lowest birth rate in the world. In 3 years' time, we will be an aging society. That's why immigration will be Korea's new survival tactic. To do that, our camp believes that there should be a separate immigration office or ministry in charge of relative duties so that we can avoid excessive spending on similar policies launched by different ministries.
As all camps said, immigration policies need to be reviewed and strengthened now more than ever. These policies will determine whether migrants can actually achieve the Korean dream. 신예은, Arirang News.
For this weekend, most parts of the country, including Seoul, will be under overcast skies. There's no major cold front coming, though, with temperatures nearing the seasonal average. For the south coast and Jeju Island, light snowfalls in the forecast for Sunday. With a rise in the readings, dust concentrations will also soar. In particular, western parts of the country will see dust levels standing in the bad category. That also includes the Seoul metropolitan area, Chungcheongdo and Jeollabuk-do provinces. Fine dust concentrations will stay high for the next couple of days, so make sure to have a mask that can filter out the fine dust particles. Most regions will see minus figures for the morning. Seoul will start off at -5 degrees Celsius. Cloudy spells will dominate for the daytime nationwide. Seoul will get up to 5 degrees, Gwangju and Daegu 10, and Gyeongju will make it to 11 degrees Celsius. Conditions will be relatively warm until the beginning of next week. Readings will hover near the seasonal average. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.